Unexpected Inheritances, The Beaumont Legacy, A Millionaire's Unforeseen Journey. Unexpected inheritances can completely change lives, and not always for the better. This story explores the real-life impact of sudden wealth, where a millionaire's fortune comes with unexpected twists and turns, leading to profound transformations. Let's dive into the story to uncover this mystery. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling stories. The panoramic view from Caspian Valerius's penthouse on the 80th floor of the 157 building in Manhattan was, by any measure, breathtaking. Below, the relentless pulse of New York City throbbed, a tapestry of yellow cabs, glittering skyscrapers, and the distant, serene expanse of Central Park. Caspian, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless ambition in the tech world, often stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a crystal tumbler of single-malt scotch in hand, watching the city lights ignite. He was a self-made titan, a billionaire forged from sheer will, code, and a childhood steeped in scarcity. Tonight, however, the city's grandeur felt like a hollow echo. The usual hum of his smart home, controlled by his own company's AI, Ethermind, seemed to mock the silence in his mind. Caspian Valerius, at 48, possessed a sharp, angular face, eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic, and a perpetually tailored suit that spoke of understated power. He wore a custom-made Patek Philippe Grand Complications on his left wrist, a subtle nod to the relentless march of time that had shaped him. Yet, beneath the veneer of success, a restless current always flowed, a residue of the past he had meticulously, painstakingly, tried to outrun. His past was a stark contrast to the polished chrome and imported marble of his present. Caspian was born in the forgotten corners of Rust Belt, Ohio, in a town called Ironwood Creek, a place where the American dream had long since rusted away. His father, a stoic man named Alaric, had worked himself to an early grave in the local steel mill, his lungs slowly succumbing to the dust and grime. His mother, Isolde, a woman with tired eyes but an unyielding spirit, cleaned houses for the affluent families in the nearby suburbs, her hands chapped and raw. Caspian remembered the gnawing hunger, the threadbare clothes, the constant anxiety that hummed beneath every conversation. He remembered the humiliation of hand-me-down shoes and the sting of being an outsider in a school where Adidas sneakers and Atari consoles were badges of honor. His escape began with a discarded Amiga 500 found in a dumpster behind a local electronics store. It was broken, a relic, but to young Caspian, it was a portal. He spent weeks, then months, poring over dusty library books, teaching himself basic electronics and programming. He fixed the computer, then another, selling them for meager sums to classmates and neighbors. He was a scrawny kid, often bullied, but in the glow of a CRT screen, he found his sanctuary, his power. The pivotal moment came during his senior year of high school. He developed a rudimentary inventory management system for the local hardware store, Hemlock's Emporium, run by an old, gruff but kind man named Old Man Hemlock. The system, clunky as it was, saved Hemlock's thousands, preventing stock losses and optimizing orders. Old Man Hemlock, impressed by the boy's ingenuity, quietly slipped Caspian a check for $500, more money than Caspian had ever seen. That check wasn't just cash, it was validation. It was the first brick in the foundation of what would become Valerius Dynamics, a global tech empire specializing in AI and data analytics. He worked tirelessly, fueled by a fear of returning to Ironwood Creek's suffocating grip. College was a blur of coding marathons and ramen noodles at Stanford University, where he graduated with honors. He launched Valerius Dynamics from a cramped apartment in Palo Alto, California, initially building custom software for small businesses. His big break came with Ethermind, an adaptive AI platform designed to optimize complex logistical operations. It was a game-changer, adopted first by major shipping companies like Transglobal Logistics, then by financial institutions, and eventually, by governments. The money poured in, a torrent that washed away the memories of poverty, or so he thought. He bought the penthouse, the private jet, the Porsche 918 Spider, the art collection. He dated supermodels and philanthropists. He built a reputation as a shrewd, often distant, visionary. But the past clung to him like a phantom limb. He never visited Ironwood Creek. He rarely spoke of his parents. His success was a fortress against the ghosts of his youth, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he could still feel the cold Ohio wind on his face. The call that shattered his carefully constructed tranquility came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by his impeccably efficient personal assistant, Anya Sharma. Mr. Valerius, a Mr. Percival Finch from Aegis Legal Solutions is on the line. He says it's regarding a deceased estate. Caspian frowned. He had no living relatives beyond a distant, estranged aunt he hadn't seen in decades. Put him through, Anya. Percival Finch's voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint, almost imperceptible Bostonian lilt. Mr. Valerius, Percival Finch here. I represent the estate of the late Serafina Beaumont. Caspian blinked. Serafina Beaumont. The name sparked a faint, almost forgotten memory, a whisper from his childhood. Serafina Beaumont. I don't believe I know anyone by that name. Ah, but you do, Mr. Valerius. Or rather, you did. Ms. Beaumont was a resident of Bar Harbor, Maine. She passed away last month at the venerable age of 92. And, to put it mildly, she has left you a rather substantial inheritance. Caspian felt a prickle of unease. Substantial? What are you talking about? Ms. Beaumont, in her last will and testament, has bequeathed to you her entire estate. That includes her primary residence, Beaumont Manor, a significant art collection, various investments, and a trust fund valued at approximately $150 million. The number hit Caspian with the force of a physical blow. $150 million. From a woman he couldn't even place. This must be a mistake, Mr. Finch. I've never met a Serafina Beaumont. On the contrary, Mr. Valerius, Finch's voice held a note of polite insistence. Ms. Beaumont was quite clear. Her will, meticulously drafted and witnessed, explicitly names Caspian Arthur Valerius as the sole beneficiary. She even provided your full name and date of birth. We've verified your identity through multiple channels. A forgotten image flickered in Caspian's mind, a grand, old house on the edge of Ironwood Creek, surrounded by an impenetrable hedge. A woman, elegant and distant, sometimes seen tending a rose garden. He was a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8, delivering newspapers for the Ironwood Creek Chronicle. He'd once accidentally kicked a soccer ball into her garden. She hadn't yelled. She'd simply picked it up, dusted it off, and handed it back with a small, knowing smile. Serafina Beaumont. The reclusive, eccentric old lady who lived in the mansion on the hill. The one everyone whispered about. Serafina Beaumont, Caspian murmured, the name finally connecting. She lived in Ironwood Creek. Indeed. Though she spent her later years at Beaumont Manor in Maine. It appears she had a long memory, Mr. Valerius. Finch paused, then continued, there are, however, certain conditions attached to this inheritance. Conditions that Ms. Beaumont insisted upon with considerable fervor. Conditions? Caspian's unease deepened. Nothing in life came without a price, he knew that. Especially not $150 million from a ghost. Yes. Ms. Beaumont was a woman of strong convictions. She stipulated that to fully receive the inheritance, you must personally oversee the restoration and conversion of Beaumont Manor into a public arts and cultural center. And, Finch added, his voice dropping slightly, you must spend a minimum of 6 months living on the property during the initial phase of the project. Caspian stared out at the glittering cityscape, the vibrant pulse of his empire. 6 months in a remote manor in Maine, overseeing a project he had no interest in, for a woman he barely knew. It was an absurd, almost insulting proposition. He, Caspian Valerius, who controlled algorithms that moved markets, was being asked to play a glorified contractor. That's preposterous, Caspian scoffed, a cold anger beginning to simmer. I have a company to run. I have responsibilities. Ms. Beaumont anticipated such a reaction. Mr. Valerius, Finch replied, his tone unwavering. Her will is quite explicit. Failure to comply with these conditions within 1 year of her passing will result in the entire estate being liquidated and donated to a rather obscure charity in Patagonia, a foundation dedicated to the preservation of rare species of moss. She was quite specific about the moss. Caspian closed his eyes, a headache blooming behind them. Moss. He was being held hostage by moss. This wasn't a gift, it was a trap. A bizarre, elaborate, and utterly inconvenient trap. The irony was bitter. He had escaped the suffocating smallness of Ironwood Creek, only to be dragged back, indirectly, by a woman from that very town, into another form of imposed obligation. The unexpected wealth, far from being a blessing, already felt like a burden, a disruption to the meticulously ordered life he had built. He could feel the first tendrils of negativity, the stark contrast to his carefully curated existence, beginning to wrap around him. The call ended, leaving Caspian alone in the vast silence of his penthouse. The city lights outside seemed to mock him, their brilliance a reminder of the world he commanded, a world now threatened by the eccentric last wishes of a woman he barely remembered. He had always believed in control, in logic, in the predictable outcomes of calculated risks. This, however, was entirely unpredictable. And for the first time in a long time, Caspian Valerius felt a profound sense of unease, a premonition that this inheritance would bring far more than just money into his life. It would bring the past, in ways he couldn't yet fathom, crashing into his present. What do you think about these unexpected strings attached? Are they a burden or an opportunity for change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days following Percival Finch's call were a blur of suppressed frustration for Caspian. His usual laser focus on Valerius dynamics wavered. Board meetings felt like distant echoes, and the intricate algorithms of Ethermind seemed less compelling than the image of a remote, moss-obsessed charity in Patagonia. The sheer audacity of Serafina Beaumont's will gnawed at him. He, Caspian Valerius, a man who dictated his own terms, was being dictated to by a deceased eccentric from his forgotten past. He considered fighting it. His legal team, led by the formidable Eleanor Vance, no relation to Serafina, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer from Sterling and Stone, had explored every loophole. The will is ironclad, Mr. Valerius, Eleanor had stated, her voice devoid of emotion. Ms. Beaumont clearly anticipated any challenge. The clauses are meticulously drafted. It's either the manner and the conditions, or the moss. The moss. The ridiculousness of it was almost comical, but the underlying threat was very real. $150 million was a significant sum, even for Caspian. It wasn't about needing the money, he certainly didn't, but the principle. To let it slip away because of an old woman's whims felt like a personal defeat. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down from beyond the grave. And Caspian Valerius rarely backed down from a challenge. He finally made the decision, not out of desire, but out of a perverse sense of obligation and a simmering curiosity. What was Serafina Beaumont's true motive? Why him? He had been a mere newspaper boy, a fleeting shadow in her grand life. Anya, he said, turning from the projection, his voice firm, contact Finch. Tell him I accept. Arrange for a private jet to Bangor International Airport in Maine. I want to be at Beaumont Manor by the end of the week. And clear my schedule for the next 6 months. Dr. Petrova will handle all operations in my absence. Anya raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in her usually impassive gaze. 6 months, Mr. Valerius. That's a significant commitment. It's a necessary one, Caspian retorted, though he wasn't sure if he was convincing Anya or himself. And I want a full dossier on Serafina Beaumont. Everything. Her life, her family, her connections, her eccentricities. I want to know why she picked me. The journey to Maine was a stark physical and psychological transition. His private jet, a sleek Gulfstream G650, cut through the crisp autumn air, leaving the concrete canyons of New York behind. As they descended, the landscape transformed. The sprawling urban grid gave way to vast stretches of deep green forest, punctuated by glimpses of a rugged coastline and the shimmering expanse of the Atlantic. The air, even through the cabin's filtered environment, felt cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and salt. Upon landing at Bangor, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class awaited him, driven by a taciturn local driver named Reese, arranged by Aegis Legal Solutions. The drive to Bar Harbor was long, winding through quaint New England towns like Ellsworth and along scenic coastal roads. The architecture shifted from towering glass and steel to weathered clapboard houses and historic brick buildings. The pace of life seemed to slow, a stark contrast to the relentless rhythm of Manhattan. Caspian, accustomed to constant connectivity and the hum of data, found the relative quiet unsettling. His Starlink satellite phone, usually buzzing with alerts, remained largely silent. He felt a strange, almost alien sensation of being disconnected, adrift. This was the first negative impact of his new reality, the forced acceleration, the abrupt severing of his digital umbilical cord. As they approached Bar Harbor, the town itself felt like a postcard from another era. Quaint shops, lobster shacks, and the distant cry of gulls painted a picture of idyllic simplicity. But Caspian wasn't here for a vacation. He was here to fulfill a bizarre posthumous decree. Reese finally turned onto a long, winding gravel driveway, flanked by ancient, gnarled oak trees whose branches, heavy with autumn leaves, formed a dark canopy. The air grew cooler, and the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the car. Through a break in the trees, Caspian caught his first glimpse of Beaumont Manor. It wasn't the dilapidated, crumbling ruin he half expected. Instead, it was a grand, imposing structure of dark gray stone, built in the Victorian Gothic style, with turrets, gables, and a multitude of tall, narrow windows that seemed to stare out like watchful eyes. Ivy, thick and ancient, clung to its walls, giving it a brooding, almost melancholic air. It stood on a slight rise, overlooking what appeared to be a vast, overgrown garden that sloped down towards the distant, glittering ocean. The manor was beautiful in a haunting, austere way, but it also exuded an undeniable sense of neglect. The paint on the trim was peeling, some of the windows were dark and dusty, and the once manicured lawns were now wild and untamed. It was a monument to a bygone era, frozen in time, waiting. Reese pulled the car to a stop in front of a massive, intricately carved oak door. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of the sea. Caspian stepped out, feeling the cool Maine air on his face. He looked up at the manor, its imposing silhouette against the darkening sky, and a shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just a house, it was a repository of secrets, a tangible link to a past he had tried so hard to bury. A figure emerged from the shadows of the porch, a woman, tall and slender, with a severe bun of silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a sensible tweed jacket and carried a clipboard. "Mr. Valerius? I'm Beatrice Croft, the estate manager. Mr. Finch informed me of your arrival. Welcome to Beaumont Manor." Her voice was crisp, efficient, with a hint of weary resignation. Caspian extended a hand, which she shook briefly, her grip surprisingly firm. "Beatrice Croft. Thank you. The manor is extensive," she began, sweeping a hand towards the imposing structure, "and requires considerable attention. Ms. Beaumont left very specific instructions regarding its restoration. I have prepared a preliminary brief for you." As she left, Caspian was left alone in the vast silence. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, untamed gardens. Beyond them, the dark expanse of the Atlantic stretched to the horizon, dotted with the faint lights of distant buoys. The beauty was undeniable, but it was a wild, untamed beauty, mirroring the chaos he felt within. Caspian has accepted the challenge, but will this change of environment bring positive outcomes or merely add to his burdens? Don't miss the next developments. Hit the subscribe button to follow the story. Beatrice Croft, the estate manager, was a woman carved from granite and efficiency. Her tour of Beaumont Manor was less an introduction and more a grim inventory of decay. Each creaking floorboard, each peeling patch of wallpaper, each dusty, shrouded piece of furniture seemed to whisper tales of neglect. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase, led to a drawing room where faded silk damask curtains hung limply, admitting only slivers of the fading afternoon light. The air was heavy, stagnant, as if time itself had paused within these walls decades ago. "The library," Beatrice Croft announced, pushing open a heavy oak door. Caspian stepped into a cavernous room lined with towering bookshelves, their contents obscured by a thick layer of dust. The scent of old paper and mildew was potent. A grand fireplace, cold and empty, dominated one wall. Ms. Beaumont was an avid reader. Many of these volumes are first editions, quite valuable. Caspian merely nodded, his mind already calculating the sheer scale of the undertaking. This wasn't just a renovation, it was an archaeological dig. Every surface, every artifact, seemed to demand meticulous attention. His Patek Philippe felt out of place here, its precise ticking a stark contrast to the manor's languid decay. The kitchen was a relic from another era, with a massive cast-iron stove and a pantry that smelled faintly of forgotten spices. "We've kept it minimally functional for the staff," Beatrice Croft explained, "but for full operation, it will require a complete overhaul." Upstairs, the bedrooms were equally grand and equally neglected. The master suite, presumably Serafina Beaumont's, was surprisingly sparse, dominated by a four-poster bed draped in a simple white sheet. A single, small, tarnished silver locket lay on the bedside table, the only personal item left exposed. Caspian felt an unexpected pang of curiosity. What secrets did this reclusive woman hold? "And this," Beatrice Croft said, leading him to a large, sun-drenched room at the front of the manor, overlooking the ocean, "is where you will reside. Ms. Beaumont instructed that this room be prepared for your stay." The room was less dusty than the others, and a freshly made bed stood in the center. A small, antique writing desk sat by the window. It was still old-fashioned, but it felt less oppressive, less burdened by the past. Yet, even here, the silence was profound, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the shore. "Dinner will be served at 7, Beatrice Croft stated, her voice cutting through the quiet. "A simple meal. We have a small staff, myself, the groundskeeper Mr. Abernathy, and cook Mrs. Gable. They have been with the estate for decades." As she left, Caspian was left alone in the vast silence. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, untamed gardens. Beyond them, the dark expanse of the Atlantic stretched to the horizon, dotted with the faint lights of distant buoys. The beauty was undeniable, but it was a wild, untamed beauty, mirroring the chaos he felt within. His first night at Beaumont Manor was restless. The unfamiliar sounds, the creaking of old wood, the sigh of the wind through the eaves, the rhythmic roar of the ocean, kept him awake. He was used to the muted hum of city life, the distant sirens, the comforting glow of streetlights. Here, the darkness was absolute, and the sounds of nature were amplified, almost menacing. He felt utterly exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced since his childhood in Ironwood Creek. This was another layer of negativity, the psychological discomfort of being stripped of his usual environment and forced into an alien, unsettling one. The next morning, Caspian began his forced immersion. Beatrice Croft presented him with a thick binder titled, Beaumont Manor Restoration Project, Phase 1. It was filled with architectural drawings, historical surveys, and a meticulously detailed budget that made even Caspian, a man accustomed to multi-million-dollar deals, wince. The projected cost for the initial phase alone was staggering, easily consuming a significant portion of the inheritance. Ms. Beaumont was very particular about the historical accuracy, Beatrice Croft explained, her finger tracing a line on a blueprint. The original materials, the craftsmanship, it's all outlined here. We've already engaged a local architectural firm, Coastal Heritage Design, and a construction company, Maine Coast Builders, to provide initial assessments. Caspian spent the day poring over the documents, his analytical mind kicking into gear despite his initial resistance. He was a master of logistics, and even this seemingly archaic project began to take on the familiar contours of a complex problem to be solved. He identified inefficiencies, potential cost overruns, and areas where modern technology could be integrated without compromising historical integrity. He found himself, almost against his will, becoming engaged. His first real confrontation came with Mr. Abernathy, the groundskeeper. Abernathy was a burly man with calloused hands and a perpetually suspicious gaze, his face weathered by years of sun and sea. He regarded Caspian with an open disdain that was palpable. "So, you're the new owner, eh?" Abernathy grunted, leaning on a rusty rake, his eyes narrowed. They were in the overgrown rose garden, a thorny wilderness that had once, according to Beatrice Croft, been Seraphina Beaumont's pride and joy. "Heard you're some city slicker, tech wizard. Don't know a thing about real work, I reckon." Caspian, accustomed to deference and respect, felt a surge of irritation. "I'm here to oversee the restoration, Mr. Abernathy. And I expect your cooperation." "Cooperation?" Abernathy scoffed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth. "This place needs more than cooperation. It needs a miracle. And it needs someone who actually cares about it, not just some rich fella chasing a handout." The accusation stung. Handout. Caspian had never taken a handout in his life. He had built his empire from nothing. This was another negative, a direct challenge to his identity and worth, coming from an unexpected source. The class divide, the resentment of the working class he had left behind, was starkly evident in Abernathy's eyes. "This handout comes with significant responsibilities, Mr. Abernathy," Caspian retorted, his voice tight. "Responsibilities I intend to fulfill. And this manor will be restored to its former glory, and more." Abernathy merely snorted, turning back to his futile efforts at taming a particularly aggressive patch of thorns. The unspoken message was clear: prove it. Later that week, Caspian met with Celeste Dubois, the lead architect from Coastal Heritage Design. Celeste was in her late 30s, with a cascade of fiery red hair and a practical, no-nonsense demeanor. Unlike Abernathy, she seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the project, her eyes lighting up as she spoke of preserving the manor's unique character. "Beaumont Manor is a gem, Mr. Valerius," Celeste explained, unrolling a large blueprint across the dining table, which Caspian had temporarily converted into a makeshift office. "It's one of the finest examples of Victorian Gothic architecture in New England. The challenge will be to modernize it for public use while retaining its historical integrity. We're talking about extensive structural repairs, new plumbing, electrical systems, climate control. It's a massive undertaking." Caspian found himself listening intently, his mind already processing the technical details. Celeste was clearly knowledgeable, passionate about her work. He saw a flicker of his own youthful ambition in her eyes, a passion he sometimes felt had been dulled by the sheer scale of his own success. "And the art collection?" Caspian inquired, remembering Finch's mention. "Where is it?" Celeste gestured vaguely towards a locked, reinforced door off the main hall. "Most of it is stored in a climate-controlled vault here, as per Ms. Beaumont's instructions. A few pieces are still on display in the main rooms, but they are covered. We'll need a proper art conservator before anything is moved or unveiled." The next few weeks fell into a grueling routine. Caspian, who usually delegated every minor task, found himself immersed in the minutiae of the manor's restoration. He reviewed contractor bids, debated the merits of different roofing materials, and even found himself discussing the proper historical pigments for repainting the intricate ceiling frescoes. He was constantly on the phone with Lena Petrova, ensuring Valerius Dynamics continued to thrive, but his attention was increasingly drawn to the tangible, physical challenges of Beaumont Manor. He also found himself clashing frequently with Beatrice Croft. While efficient, she was fiercely protective of Serafina Beaumont's legacy and resisted any deviation from the precise instructions left in the will. Ms. Beaumont specified a certain type of Italian marble for the foyer, she would state, her voice firm, not the more cost-effective local granite you propose, Mr. Valerius. But the granite is more durable and aesthetically consistent with the regional character, Caspian would argue, his patience wearing thin. Ms. Beaumont's wishes are paramount, Beatrice Croft would reply, her lips forming a thin, unyielding line. These constant battles over details, the endless negotiations with contractors, the sheer physical presence of the manor's decay, it all contributed to a growing sense of frustration and isolation for Caspian. He missed the effortless efficiency of his New York life, the immediate gratification of his digital world. Here, progress was slow, painstaking, and often met with resistance. The unexpected inheritance was indeed proving to be a source of more problems than solutions, a constant drain on his mental and emotional resources. He was a fish out of water, struggling to adapt to a world that operated entirely different principles than his own. The weight of neglect, both of the manor and of his own past, pressed down on him, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths he had long avoided. Can Caspian overcome the obstacles and opposition to fulfill Serafina Beaumont's will? Share this story with your friends to find out. As weeks bled into months, Caspian Valerius found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable equilibrium. The initial shock of Beaumont Manor had faded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache of dissatisfaction. He was no longer just a tech mogul, he was a reluctant project manager, mired in the minutiae of historical preservation. His days were a relentless cycle of meetings with contractors, architects, and conservators. He argued with Beatrice Croft over the precise shade of off-white for the ballroom walls and debated with Celeste Dubois about the structural integrity of a crumbling turret. The manor, slowly but surely, began to shed its layers of neglect. Scaffolding rose against its stone facade, and the rhythmic sounds of hammers and drills replaced the eerie silence. Dust, a constant companion, coated everything, a physical manifestation of the past being disturbed. Yet, despite the visible progress, Caspian felt little satisfaction. This was not his creation, it was an obligation, a penance. His personal life, once a whirlwind of high-stakes deals and exclusive social events, had shrunk to the confines of Beaumont Manor. His calls with Lena Petrova became longer, more frequent, as he tried to maintain a semblance of control over Valerius' dynamics from afar. He missed the intellectual stimulation of his New York team, the thrill of innovation, the sheer power of his digital empire. Here, his greatest challenge was convincing Mr. Abernathy to prune a particularly stubborn rhododendron bush. The groundskeeper remained a thorn in Caspian's side. Abernathy's disdain was unwavering, a constant reminder of the chasm between Caspian's privileged present and the working-class roots he had so desperately tried to escape. Abernathy would often make pointed comments about city money and folks who don't know a day's honest work, his words laced with a bitter resentment that Caspian recognized from his own childhood. It was a mirror reflecting a part of himself he had long suppressed, adding another layer of psychological discomfort. One blustery afternoon, while inspecting the manor's dilapidated greenhouse, Caspian stumbled upon a forgotten shed tucked away behind a thicket of overgrown lilacs. It was small, unkempt, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic. Curiosity, a rare visitor these days, pricked at him. He pushed open the creaking door. Inside, amidst cobwebs and forgotten gardening tools, stood a dusty easel and a collection of canvases, stacked haphazardly against the wall. They were covered in old tarpaulins. Caspian pulled one back, revealing a landscape painting, a vibrant, almost ethereal depiction of the Maine coastline, bathed in the golden light of dawn. The brushstrokes were bold, confident, imbued with a raw emotion that surprised him. He uncovered another, then another. They were all landscapes, seascapes, and portraits of local flora and fauna, each painted with a remarkable sensitivity and skill. These weren't the grand, formal portraits or abstract modern pieces he collected for his penthouse. These were intimate, personal works, infused with a deep love for the natural world. And then he saw it. Tucked behind a larger canvas, a smaller, older painting. It depicted a young boy, no older than 7 or 8, with unruly dark hair and serious eyes, meticulously folding a newspaper. The background was a blur of a decaying porch and a glimpse of an old, grand house. It was him. A portrait of young Caspian, the newspaper boy from Ironwood Creek. A jolt ran through him, a shock of recognition that was both unsettling and profound. Serafina Beaumont had painted him. She hadn't just known him, she had observed him, captured him in a moment of quiet industry. The painting was signed simply, S.B., and dated over 40 years ago. This was the connection. This was why. The reclusive old woman, the eccentric millionaire, had seen something in that scrawny, determined boy. She had remembered. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just about the money or the manner, it was about a hidden gaze, a silent acknowledgement from a past he had deliberately erased. He took the painting back to his room, cleaning it gently with a soft cloth. The boy in the portrait stared back at him, a ghost from a forgotten life. The silver locket he had seen on Serafina's bedside table now held a new significance. He wondered if it contained a miniature version of this very painting, or perhaps something else entirely. The discovery ignited a new, more personal drive in Caspian. He began to delve deeper into the dossier Anya had prepared on Serafina Beaumont. He learned she had been a celebrated landscape artist in her youth, before retreating from the public eye after a personal tragedy, the loss of her fiancé in a maritime accident off the coast of Maine, decades ago. Her art, once vibrant, had become increasingly reclusive, confined to her private world. She had inherited her family's considerable fortune, but had lived a quiet, almost monastic existence, dedicating herself to her art and, seemingly, to observing the world around her. He also discovered a series of letters, tucked away in an old cedar chest in the library, addressed to a "Dearest Alaric." His father. The letters, dated from Caspian's early childhood, revealed a surprising, almost tender correspondence between Serafina Beaumont and Alaric Valerius. They discussed art, philosophy, and the quiet struggles of life in Ironwood Creek. Serafina, it seemed, had been a patron of sorts to his father, quietly commissioning small wood carvings and offering gentle encouragement. His father, the stoic steelworker, had possessed a hidden artistic talent, a detail Caspian had never known. The letters painted a picture of a different Alaric than the one Caspian remembered, a man with a hidden intellectual curiosity, a sensitive soul beneath the rough exterior. This revelation was a profound shock, shaking the very foundations of Caspian's understanding of his own family. His father, whom he had always seen as a symbol of the poverty and hardship he had escaped, was suddenly a more complex, nuanced figure. This was another negative impact, a disruption of his carefully constructed narrative about his past, forcing him to re-evaluate his relationship with his deceased father and the memories associated with Ironwood Creek. The more he read, the more he understood. Serafina Beaumont hadn't just seen a newspaper boy, she had seen the son of a man she respected, a kindred spirit in the harsh landscape of Ironwood Creek. Her inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy, a final act of connection, and perhaps, a plea for something more than just financial gain. The ethical dilemmas outlined in the initial brief now took on a sharper edge. Serafina hadn't just left him money, she had left him a responsibility to art, to history, and, perhaps most disturbingly, to his own forgotten past. The strings attached were not just legal clauses, they were emotional ties, reaching across decades. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Caspian stood on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, the salt spray on his face. He held the small silver locket, which he had finally managed to open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of a young man with kind eyes and a faint smile, presumably Serafina's lost fiancé, Lysander Vale. On the other side, nestled carefully, was a miniature, hand-painted version of the very portrait of him as a boy. Serafina Beaumont had carried him, the newspaper boy, close to her heart for decades. The realization was overwhelming. He, who had always prided himself on his self-reliance, on cutting all ties to his past, was now inextricably linked to it by the will of a woman he barely knew. The unexpected inheritance was not just changing his present. It was actively reshaping his understanding of his entire life, forcing him to confront the emotional baggage he had tried to outrun. The journey to restore Beaumont Manor was becoming a journey into himself, a painful but necessary excavation of buried truths. Were you surprised by the secrets revealed about Serafina and Caspian's father? Hit like and share your thoughts. The discovery of the portrait and the letters had fundamentally altered Caspian's perspective. The manor was no longer just a legal obligation, it was a puzzle, a narrative woven through stone and time, with Serafina Beaumont as the unseen architect. His initial resentment began to morph into a grudging respect, and then, a deeper, more complex curiosity. He found himself spending less time on Valerius Dynamics calls and more time exploring the forgotten corners of Beaumont Manor, searching for more clues, more pieces of Serafina's life. He discovered a hidden compartment in the library, behind a sliding panel disguised as a bookshelf. Inside, he found a collection of journals, meticulously kept by Serafina Beaumont over decades. These weren't just mundane diaries, they were reflections, philosophical musings, and detailed observations of the world around her. She wrote about art, about loss, about the passage of time, and, surprisingly, about the subtle beauty she found in unexpected places, like a determined newspaper boy in a forgotten Ohio town. Reading her words, Caspian felt an uncanny connection to this woman he had never truly known. She wrote with a keen intellect and a profound sensitivity, qualities he rarely encountered in his high-stakes corporate world. He learned about her early life, her artistic aspirations, and the devastating maritime accident that claimed her fiancé, a young sailor named Lysander Vale. The loss had shattered her, leading to her retreat from society and her deep connection to Beaumont Manor, which had been Lysander's ancestral home. The manor itself was a monument to her grief, a crucible where her art and her sorrow intertwined. The journals also revealed her quiet philanthropy in Ironwood Creek, often anonymously supporting struggling families and local artists. She had seen the hardship, the quiet desperation, and had acted, without fanfare. This was a stark contrast to Caspian's own approach to wealth, accumulation and control. Serafina's legacy was about giving, about nurturing. One entry, dated shortly after his father, Alaric, had passed away, particularly struck him. Alaric's light has dimmed. A true artist, trapped by circumstance. I pray his son, Caspian, finds the freedom to soar beyond the shadows of this place. He has a fire in his eyes, a hunger I recognize. May he use it for something more than just survival. The words resonated deeply, echoing his own lifelong drive. Serafina had seen him, truly seen him, even as a child. Her inheritance was not a random act of charity. It was a deliberate, calculated intervention, a final, grand gesture to guide him towards a different path. The strings attached were not punitive, they were guiding threads, pulling him towards a legacy of generosity and purpose beyond mere profit. This revelation was a profound shift, transforming the negative burden into a complex, challenging opportunity. His interactions with Beatrice Croft also began to change. As Caspian demonstrated a genuine interest in the manor's history and Serafina's vision, her rigid demeanor softened, ever so slightly. She began sharing anecdotes about Ms. Beaumont, revealing glimpses of the woman behind the eccentric facade. Beatrice Croft spoke of Serafina's quiet acts of kindness, her deep love for the arts, and her unwavering belief in the transformative power of beauty. She always said, Beatrice Croft recounted one morning, as they reviewed plans for the new gallery spaces, that art wasn't just for the privileged. It was for everyone. It was a language that transcended barriers, a way to connect with the human spirit. This sentiment, so alien to Caspian's corporate ethos, began to take root. He started to see the restoration not just as a construction project, but as an act of creation, a way to bring Serafina's vision to life. He even found himself, on occasion, sketching out ideas for the public spaces, a creative impulse he hadn't indulged since his early coding days. However, the psychological effects of sudden wealth, even inherited wealth, began to manifest in unexpected ways. While Caspian was already a billionaire, the sheer, unearned nature of this new fortune, coupled with its peculiar conditions, stirred a subtle anxiety. He found himself questioning his own motivations, his past achievements. Was his wealth truly earned, or was he now just another recipient of unmerited privilege? This internal conflict, a form of imposter syndrome, was a new and uncomfortable negative impact. The social dynamics around him also shifted. News of the eccentric inheritance had leaked, fueled by local gossip in Bar Harbor and a sensational article in the Wall Street Journal titled "Tech Titan Trades Towers for Turrets, The Curious Case of Beaumont Manor." Suddenly, Caspian was no longer just the reclusive billionaire, he was the Beaumont heir, a figure of local fascination and, for some, resentment. He received a deluge of unsolicited advice, investment proposals, and desperate pleas for charity. His personal email, usually shielded by layers of corporate firewalls, was inundated. He even had a few persistent individuals, self-proclaimed spiritual advisors and energy healers, attempt to gain access to the manor, convinced that Serafina Beaumont had left behind hidden spiritual secrets. This unwanted attention, the constant scrutiny, was a new form of intrusion, a negative consequence of his newfound, public inheritance. The most significant social dynamic change came from his own family. His estranged aunt Isolde, his mother's sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in decades, suddenly reappeared. She called him, her voice saccharine sweet, reminiscing about his childhood and subtly hinting at her own financial struggles. "Caspian, darling, it's been too long. Your mother, bless her soul, always spoke so highly of you. You know, times have been tough since everything." Caspian felt a familiar prickle of resentment. Where had she been when his family was struggling in Ironwood Creek? Where was the concern then? The sudden interest, clearly motivated by the inheritance, was a bitter pill. It highlighted the transactional nature of some family relationships, a negative aspect of wealth he had always been acutely aware of. He politely but firmly rebuffed her overtures, reinforcing his isolation. Despite these new challenges, Caspian found himself drawn deeper into the manor's artistic legacy. He spent hours in the dusty vault, carefully examining Serafina's art collection. Beyond her landscapes, he found a series of abstract pieces, bold and experimental, that spoke of a restless, searching spirit. He realized that Serafina Beaumont was not just a benefactor, she was a mentor, guiding him, even in death, towards a broader understanding of life, art, and purpose. The journey to restore Beaumont Manor was becoming less about fulfilling a will and more about understanding a woman, and in doing so, understanding himself. The initial negative impacts of the unexpected inheritance, the disruption, the discomfort, the forced confrontation with his past, were slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to yield something else, a nascent sense of purpose, a connection to something larger than himself and his empire. The question of, what if that sudden wealth came with strings attached, leading to unexpected twists and turns, was no longer hypothetical. It was his reality, and the twists are only just beginning. Caspian is slowly changing, but will he truly find a new purpose? Hit like and subscribe to not miss the next developments. As Caspian's 6-month residency at Beaumont Manor approached its midpoint, the lines between obligation and genuine engagement blurred. The manor, once a symbol of his unwanted past, was slowly transforming into a canvas for his unexpected future. The scaffolding was coming down, revealing freshly pointed stone and gleaming new windows. Inside, the grand rooms were being meticulously restored, their historical grandeur re-emerging from beneath layers of dust and decay. He found himself working closely with Celeste Dubois, the architect. Her passion for historical preservation was infectious, and her detailed knowledge of Victorian Gothic architecture impressed him. They spent hours debating design choices, from the intricate patterns of the restored ceiling frescoes to the placement of modern lighting systems that would subtly highlight the manor's original features. Celeste, with her pragmatic approach and artistic eye, became an unexpected confidant, a bridge between Caspian's logical world and Serafina's artistic one. Ms. Beaumont had a remarkable vision, Celeste commented one afternoon, as they walked through what would become the main gallery. She designed many of these spaces herself, even the hidden passages. It's almost as if she built a puzzle within these walls, waiting for someone to solve it. Hidden passages. The phrase sparked Caspian's curiosity. He had explored the manor extensively, but had he missed something? He recalled Serafina's journals, her love for puzzles and hidden meanings. The psychological effects of his new life continued to evolve. The imposter syndrome, while still present, was now tempered by a growing sense of purpose. He was building something tangible, something that would outlast his digital empire. Yet, the constant public scrutiny remained a negative undercurrent. Tourists would often drive by, slowing down to gawk at the billionaire's folly, and local reporters from the Bar Harbor Times would occasionally try to sneak onto the property for a scoop. Caspian, who valued his privacy above all else, found this constant invasion deeply irritating. The social dynamics also presented new challenges. While some locals were genuinely excited about the future arts center, others viewed Caspian with suspicion, seeing him as an outsider, a wealthy interloper. He overheard whispers in the local lobster pot diner about city money ruining the charm of Bar Harbor, and another rich guy buying up everything. This resentment, a familiar echo of his Ironwood Creek days, was a stark reminder that wealth, even when used for good, could breed animosity. His most persistent challenge, however, came from an unexpected quarter, the local historical society, led by a formidable woman named Genevieve Sterling. Ms. Sterling, a descendant of one of Bar Harbor's founding families, was fiercely protective of the town's heritage and viewed Caspian's project with extreme skepticism. Mr. Valerius, she declared at a tense town hall meeting, her voice sharp and accusatory, while we appreciate the potential for a cultural center, we have concerns. Beaumont Manor is a historical landmark, not a playground for a tech mogul's whims. We insist on strict adherence to historical preservation guidelines, and we will be monitoring every single step. Her words, delivered with a thinly veiled threat, were a public challenge to his authority and intentions. Caspian, accustomed to wielding absolute power in his corporate world, found himself navigating a labyrinth of local politics, community expectations, and historical sensitivities. It was a frustrating, often infuriating, process, a constant reminder that money couldn't buy universal approval or bypass established rules. This was a significant negative impact, forcing him to confront the limitations of his wealth and influence in a community-driven environment. One evening, while reviewing old blueprints of the manor in the library, Caspian noticed a discrepancy. A section of the wall in the grand ballroom, marked as solid stone on the original plans, appeared to have a faint, almost imperceptible seam on a later, handwritten sketch by Serafina. Recalling Celeste's words about hidden passages, a thrill of discovery ran through him. He called Celeste immediately. Together, they meticulously examined the wall. After hours of searching, they found it, a cleverly disguised latch, hidden behind a decorative sconce. With a gentle push, a section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a narrow, dusty passage. The passage was dark, cool, and smelled of damp earth and stale air. It led down a winding staircase, deeper into the manor's foundations. At the bottom, they found a small, circular chamber, unlit and seemingly empty. But as Celeste shone her powerful flashlight around, a flicker of light caught Caspian's eye. Tucked into a small alcove, hidden behind a loose stone, was a single, ornate wooden box. It was old, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to depict constellations and ancient maritime maps. Caspian felt a surge of anticipation. This was more than just a hidden passage, it was a deliberate secret, a final message from Serafina. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not more money or jewels, but a collection of old letters, tied with a silk ribbon. They were addressed to Serafina Beaumont, and the handwriting was familiar, his father's, Alaric Valerius. These letters were different from the ones he had found previously. They were more personal, more intimate. They spoke of a shared dream, a secret project, a yearning for something beyond their constricted lives in Ironwood Creek. Alaric wrote of a grand design, a legacy of light, they hoped to create together, a place where art and nature could intertwine, a sanctuary for forgotten beauty. The letters revealed that Alaric, far from being just a steelworker with a hidden talent, had been a visionary in his own right, collaborating with Serafina on the initial concepts for what would become Beaumont Manor's public arts center. He had sketched designs, offered philosophical insights, and dreamed of a place that would inspire others, just as Serafina's art had inspired him. His premature death had left the project unfinished, a silent promise. The revelation was staggering. His father, the man he had always seen as a victim of circumstance, had been a co-creator of Serafina's grand vision. The manor wasn't just Serafina's legacy, it was their legacy, a shared dream that spanned decades and transcended death. This was a profound positive shift, transforming his understanding of his father and the entire inheritance. The negative impact of his father's perceived limitations was replaced by a sense of pride and connection. But the letters also contained a chilling detail. Alaric mentioned a rival, a ruthless industrialist named Silas Blackwood, who had tried to acquire the land where Beaumont Manor stood, years ago, for a massive industrial development. Blackwood had been relentless, using legal loopholes and intimidation tactics. Serafina and Alaric had fought him off, but the struggle had left deep scars. The letters hinted at Blackwood's continued, shadowy influence, even after his apparent defeat. Caspian felt a cold knot of dread. Was this ancient conflict still alive? Was there more to Serafina's will than just philanthropy? The intriguing question, from the initial outline, what if that sudden wealth came with strings attached, leading to unexpected twists and turns, now took on a darker, more ominous meaning. The labyrinth of legacy was deeper than he had imagined, and within its hidden passages, unseen dangers might still lurk. The unexpected inheritance was not just a journey of self-discovery, it was potentially a journey into a hidden battle, a confrontation with forces he hadn't anticipated. Can Caspian unravel the full mystery of this legacy and confront the hidden threats? Hit like and leave a comment with your predictions. The revelation of Silas Blackwood's past attempts to seize the Beaumont land sent a cold shiver down Caspian's spine. It wasn't just a historical footnote, it felt like a premonition. He immediately tasked Anya Sharma, his ever-efficient assistant back in New York, with a new directive: dig into Silas Blackwood. Everything. His current holdings, his associates, any recent land acquisitions in Maine, especially around Bar Harbor. Anya, accustomed to Caspian's sudden, intense shifts in focus, delivered a comprehensive report within days. Silas Blackwood, now in his late 70s, was still a formidable, albeit more discreet, force in the industrial world. His company, Obsidian Holdings, had diversified from manufacturing into vast real estate development, often with a reputation for aggressive tactics and disregard for environmental concerns. The report confirmed Caspian's fears. Obsidian Holdings had recently acquired several large tracts of land adjacent to Beaumont Manor, quietly, through shell corporations. Their stated intention was to build a luxury coastal resort, but the detailed plans, unearthed by Anya's team, hinted at a much larger, more environmentally destructive project, a sprawling complex of condominiums, a private marina, and even a small, private airstrip, all designed to cater to the ultra-rich, with little regard for the delicate ecosystem of the Maine coast. This was the shocking revelation, from the initial outline, manifesting in a tangible, immediate threat. Serafina Beaumont hadn't just left him an inheritance, she had bequeathed him a battle. Her will, with its seemingly eccentric conditions, was a strategic defense, a final act to protect the land she cherished from the very forces she had fought decades ago. The hidden agenda was not malicious, it was protective, a legacy of stewardship. Caspian felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about the desecration of a place his father had dreamed of, a place Serafina had dedicated her life to preserving. The contrast between Blackwood's destructive ambition and Serafina's vision of beauty and preservation was stark, a direct challenge to the burgeoning sense of purpose Caspian was finding. This was a profound negative impact, pulling him back into the cutthroat world he thought he was escaping, but this time, with a different motivation. He called a meeting with Celeste Dubois and Beatrice Croft, laying out the evidence. Celeste's face hardened as she reviewed the blueprints. "This is catastrophic, Mr. Valerius. This development would destroy the natural beauty of the coastline, disrupt migratory bird paths, and likely pollute the marine ecosystem. It would be a blight." Beatrice Croft, usually stoic, clenched her jaw. Ms. Beaumont always feared this. She knew Silas Blackwood was relentless. This is why she insisted on the manor becoming a public trust. She believed that public ownership, a shared legacy, would be its strongest defense. Caspian realized the true genius of Serafina's will. By making the manor a public arts and cultural center, it would gain a level of protection that private ownership, even by a billionaire, could not provide. It would become a community asset, a symbol, rallying local support against Blackwood's predatory expansion. His 6-month residency was no longer a burden, it was a strategic imperative. He needed to accelerate the restoration, to open the center, to solidify its public status before Blackwood could make his next move. The legal considerations now extended beyond simply distributing the inheritance, they involved defending it. He engaged Sterling and Stone, his corporate legal team, but with a new focus. Eleanor Vance, his sharp-witted lawyer, flew to Maine. "Silas Blackwood is a formidable opponent, Mr. Valerius," she warned, poring over the property deeds. "He operates in the shadows, using layers of shell companies. Proving his intent will be challenging." Caspian, however, had an advantage Blackwood didn't anticipate: his own vast resources and technological prowess. He deployed Ethermind's advanced data analytics capabilities, not for corporate espionage, but for environmental protection. He used satellite imagery, drone surveillance, and public records analysis to meticulously map Blackwood's land acquisitions, identify potential environmental violations, and track his financial movements. He discovered a pattern of acquiring land in ecologically sensitive areas, then pushing through development permits with questionable speed, often through local political connections. The more he dug, the more enraged he became. Blackwood represented everything Caspian had once been, or feared becoming: a ruthless accumulator of wealth, blind to the human and environmental cost. This was a crucial turning point, transforming the psychological effects of sudden wealth from anxiety into a fierce determination to use his power for good. He also found an unexpected ally in Mr. Abernathy. The groundskeeper, initially hostile, had observed Caspian's relentless work on the manor, his genuine concern for the property, and his growing understanding of Serafina's vision. When Caspian explained Blackwood's plans, Abernathy's weathered face hardened. "Blackwood," Abernathy spat, his eyes narrowed. "He tried to buy my grandfather's land, too. A snake. Always a snake." He then offered invaluable local knowledge, pointing Caspian to old property lines, forgotten easements, and local regulations that Blackwood might be trying to circumvent. Abernathy, with his deep roots in the community, became a crucial source of intelligence and a symbol of the local resistance. Caspian also reached out to Genevieve Sterling of the Historical Society. Despite their previous clashes, he presented her with the evidence of Blackwood's plans, emphasizing the threat to Bar Harbor's natural heritage. Genevieve, though still wary, recognized the gravity of the situation. "This is unacceptable," she stated, her voice firm. "Beaumont Manor is a symbol. We will not let it fall." The community, initially skeptical, began to rally. Local environmental groups, conservationists, and concerned citizens, armed with the data Caspian provided, launched a public awareness campaign. The Bar Harbor Times, once focused on billionaire's folly, now ran front-page stories exposing Obsidian Holdings' dubious practices. The social dynamics shifted, with Caspian, the wealthy interloper, slowly transforming into a reluctant leader, uniting the community against a common threat. Silas Blackwood, unaccustomed to such organized resistance, began to feel the pressure. His attempts to push through permits were met with increasing scrutiny and public outcry. He tried to intimidate Caspian, sending veiled threats through intermediaries, hinting at legal repercussions and financial ruin. But Caspian, who had faced down corporate raiders and hostile takeovers, was unfazed. He was no longer just protecting his inheritance. He was defending a legacy, his father's dream, and the future of a community. The potential for unexpected inheritances to disrupt family relationships was now inverted. It was strengthening new, unexpected bonds. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Caspian felt a profound sense of purpose that transcended the pursuit of profit. The unexpected inheritance, initially a source of negativity and disruption, had forced him to confront his past, challenge his values, and ultimately, find a new direction. The fight against Blackwood was not just a legal or financial battle, it was a moral one, a testament to the enduring impact of Serafina Beaumont's single, generous, and strategically brilliant act. Caspian is embarking on a battle not just for money, but for a higher purpose. Do you think he will succeed? Hit like and share your thoughts. The legal and public battle against Silas Blackwood escalated. Obsidian Holdings, accustomed to operating in the shadows, found itself under an unprecedented spotlight. Caspian, leveraging his vast network and the power of Ethermind, systematically exposed Blackwood's questionable land deals, environmental shortcuts, and political maneuvering. The data, presented clearly and irrefutably, turned public opinion decisively against the proposed resort. Local protests, fueled by Caspian's support and Abernathy's deep community ties, became a regular occurrence. Genevieve Sterling, once Caspian's adversary, now stood shoulder to shoulder with him at town hall meetings, passionately defending Bar Harbor's heritage. The local media, invigorated by the unfolding drama, meticulously documented every twist and turn. Silas Blackwood, cornered and increasingly desperate, launched a counteroffensive. He initiated a series of frivolous lawsuits against Caspian, alleging defamation and business interference. He even attempted to discredit Caspian's character, leaking old, exaggerated stories about his ruthless corporate tactics. But Caspian, now fortified by his newfound purpose, met each attack with calm resolve and overwhelming evidence. Eleanor Vance, his lawyer, skillfully dismantled Blackwood's legal challenges, turning the tables on him. Meanwhile, the restoration of Beaumont Manor pressed forward. Celeste Dubois and her team, inspired by Caspian's renewed dedication, worked tirelessly. The manor, once a symbol of neglect, was now a beacon of hope. The grand opening of the Beaumont Arts and Cultural Center was set for the end of Caspian's 6-month residency. The day of the opening arrived, a crisp, clear autumn morning. The manor, fully restored to its Victorian Gothic splendor, gleamed under the sun. The overgrown gardens had been meticulously manicured, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly bloomed roses. Hundreds of people from Bar Harbor and beyond flocked to the event, artists, historians, community leaders, and curious onlookers. Caspian, standing on the newly restored grand porch, felt a profound sense of accomplishment, unlike any he had experienced from a successful business deal. This was different. This was tangible, meaningful. He saw Beatrice Croft, her eyes shining with pride, directing visitors. He saw Mr. Abernathy, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by a rare smile, chatting with guests in the rose garden. He saw Celeste Dubois, beaming, explaining the architectural details to an eager crowd. His speech was brief, heartfelt. He spoke not of his own wealth or achievements, but of Serafina Beaumont's vision, of his father Alaric's dream, and of the power of community. He announced the establishment of the Beaumont Legacy Fund, a substantial endowment from the inheritance to ensure the ongoing operation and expansion of the center, and to support emerging artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly in the Rust Belt region. This was the legacy of generosity, taking concrete form, creating social good through philanthropy. The highlight of the opening was the unveiling of Serafina Beaumont's art collection. In the main gallery, bathed in soft, natural light, her landscapes and abstract pieces spoke volumes. And in a place of honor, hung prominently, was the portrait of young Caspian, the newspaper boy, a silent testament to the unexpected connection that had started it all. As the day progressed, Caspian found himself engaging with visitors, listening to their stories, and witnessing the joy and inspiration the center brought. He saw children marveling at the art, elderly couples reminiscing about Serafina, and aspiring artists finding new hope. The enduring impact of a single act of generosity was unfolding before his eyes. The legal battle with Obsidian Holdings continued for months after the opening, but the momentum had shifted. With public opinion firmly against him, and Caspian's legal team systematically dismantling his shell corporations and exposing his violations, Silas Blackwood eventually conceded. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of severe penalties, he abandoned his resort plans and sold his adjacent landholdings to a conservation trust, facilitated by Caspian, ensuring the preservation of the coastline. Caspian Valerius, the tech billionaire, had won. But this victory felt different. It wasn't about market share or profit margins. It was about protection, preservation, and purpose. He had fulfilled Serafina Beaumont's will, not just legally, but spiritually. He had transformed a neglected manor into a vibrant cultural hub, protected a precious ecosystem, and, in doing so, had finally reconciled with his own past, embracing the complex legacy of his father. He didn't return to New York permanently. While he continued to oversee Valerius Dynamics remotely, he divided his time between his penthouse and Beaumont Manor. He found a new rhythm, a balance between the digital world he commanded and the tangible world he now nurtured. The unexpected inheritance, initially a source of negativity and disruption, had become the catalyst for his profound transformation. It had shown him that true wealth lay not just in accumulation, but in connection, in contribution, and in the enduring power of a legacy that ripples through generations. He had awakened a millionaire, and the unexpected twists and turns had indeed led him to a life far richer than he could have ever imagined. Caspian has found his true purpose in life. Do you believe a single act of generosity can change someone's life forever? Hit like, subscribe, comment, and share this story to inspire everyone.